You're probably wondering, why does my mix sound bad? Or why does my song sound bad? Well, let me ask you these questions. Do you understand what you are doing, or are you just pressing buttons? Do you even know what sound is, or how we as humans perceive it? In order to be able to mix better, we need to understand what sound is and how we perceive this. And this is called psychoacoustics. So, what is sound? Sound is vibration which travels as an acoustic pressure wave throughout a medium. Now, we're using big words. Let's break it down. It's vibration that's traveling, so as a wave, through a medium, gas, liquid, solid. There's no sound in space because it's in a vacuum, there's no medium. Basically, there's a change in air pressure which we perceive as sound. It's measured in dB SPL, decibels sound pressure level. So, to understand psychoacoustics, we need to start with this right here. Hope you could see in my ear hole. So, very simply, the auditory system is comprised of the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. All of these play a pivotal role in how we perceive sound. We have a hearing range of 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz or 20 kHz. We perceive the lower frequency as lower pitches and the higher frequencies as higher pitches. Now, the main difference between us and a microphone, besides the fact that we have two ears, is that we have brains. Our brains help us decode all the information in our environment. So let's talk about masking. Masking is a phenomenon that occurs when a loud sound obscures a quiet one. For example, if I'm honking my horn, I'm probably not going to hear the birds chirping outside. Psychoacoustics reveals that our brains prioritize certain sounds over others. This selective attention helps us focus on what we need to focus on in that moment. It basically filters out information. So our brains are basically EQing for us. When it comes to having a good mix, masking can play a huge role in your mix sounding bad. So your arrangement and your sound selection should be distributed properly across the frequency spectrum. So basically what I mean, I'm not going to pick all mid or low range instruments. I'm going to put something in the higher frequencies. I'm going to put something in the middle. I'm going to put something in the low. I will do another video talking more about EQ and the compression and all of these different things. So stay tuned. Now, let's talk about how we localize sound. What do I mean by localize? Basically, what I mean is just simple. How do I know whether a sound is coming from the left or the right, or behind me or in front of me, without visual cues, so if my eyes were closed? So we as humans localize sound by two processes. Actually, three. Interaural time differences and interaural level differences and frequency. So you have pinna. Basically, interaural time differences is the time it takes from sound to reach from this ear to this ear. So there's a difference. It's a very small difference, but our brains are fast enough to detect the difference between sound hitting this ear and this ear. Interaural level differences is the differences in level, so volume, between one ear and the other. Basically, time differences are needed for frequencies below around 700 Hz. Why? This is because the wavelength of these tones, sine waves, sounds, the wavelength of something 700 Hz and below is much larger than the distance between the ear to ear. So lower frequencies tend to use this time difference. The long wavelength relative to the size of our head means that the level differences will be negligible. My professor, words of my professor. The sweet spot for localization is where the wavelength is closest to the ear-to-ear distance. So how can we use this in a practical mixing aspect? So basically, we know how we localize frequencies, right? Real life. Picture this, right? We in a field. I am super far away, right? Super far away. And I have a speaker, like a monitor, and I play some loud music. Because I'm far away, what I'm actually going to hear is more bass. I'm not really going to hear that much high frequencies. The closer you get, the higher the frequencies you're going to hear. Think about when you hear somebody playing music in the distance. The closer you get, the more clarity you hear, the more you can understand the words. Why can you understand the words? The words have higher frequencies. Where we speak is in that 2 to 5K range, and that's where we are most sensitive to hearing. Expanding on localization, we use frequency as well. Most of the time when we mix, we are thinking about left and right, stereo, right? But we need to think more about the front to back relationship as well. We often neglect that. And that brings me to the topic of depth. So if you're mixing and you want to bring something forward in the mix, you'd want to add more high frequencies. If you want to push something back in the mix for it to sound like it's coming further away from you, less high frequencies. The things that really create depth in the audio field, how to achieve depth in a mix, is really frequency and the direct to reverberant ratio. Why am I talking about this direct to reverberant ratio? Okay, we're going to talk about reflections. Sound reflects in our environment, right? We don't exist in an anechoic chamber. When we speak, sound is reflecting off these walls right now. It's bouncing off everywhere. That's how we live in reality. These reflections provide cues that let us localize sound and understand what's going on. So basically, I'm in this room right now. If I play music from my speakers right here, from my phone speaker, if I play music right now, the direct to reverberant ratio is so low because the direct sound is coming directly into my ear. The further away I go, that direct to reverberant ratio is going to increase. I'm going to have less direct sound and more reverberant sound coming in. And there's going to come a point where it reaches a threshold, and then past that, you have more reverberant sound versus more direct sound. How can we apply this practically? Let's say you mix in your bedroom, in a bad room, okay? It's not treated well. If you're using speakers and you don't have headphones, mix at a lower level. This will allow you to have less room reflections and more direct sound, so you're actually hearing what's coming out of the speaker and not the room interaction. When you mix and you hear the room too much, it could make it sound better than it actually is, because the sound is coming into the room and we're hearing all the reflection, which is what we are naturally used to. So it sounds better than it actually is. That's why when you take your mix out somewhere else and it sounds trashy, you're like, oh, why does it sound bad? Well, you may be mixing in a bad room too high of a level. Use headphones and lower the volume a little bit. Frequency. Generally, if something has more high frequencies, we perceive it as closer. And if it has less high frequencies, we perceive it as further away. Now, let's delve into loudness. Loudness is linked to the amplitude of a wave. So if I have a wave like this, the amplitude, that top-down part. The greater the amplitude, the louder the sound. Our perception of loudness is not linear, but logarithmic. We perceive loudness based on frequency. Let me say that again. We perceive loudness based on frequency. This was studied by two researchers in Bell Labs, Harvey Fletcher and W.A. Munson. And they came up with the Fletcher-Munson curve. Basically, they did these experiments where they played a specific test frequency followed by a 1 kilohertz tone, and the listener chose which one was louder. So if we look at this chart here, the Fletcher-Munson curve, we look at the 6 Fons line, we could see that around 4 kilohertz, to perceive this at the same intensity, this at 4 kilohertz needs to be played around, let's say, 55 decibels. Whereas to perceive 100 hertz at the same level, to perceive it at the same loudness, that tone needs to be played at around 75 decibels. So that's a huge difference. So clearly we as humans are more sensitive to the mid and high frequencies. This is where speech lives. Babies cry in this range, so it's speculated that it's because of this that evolutionarily we are more sensitive to hear the baby crying. You know, you need to hear the baby crying in the street. It should be noted that real life tones are made up of a lot of different, it's complex sound. It's not just a pure sine wave, but this concept still remains generally the same. Since we know how sensitive to level we are, we need to check our mixes at multiple levels. We need to check it at low levels, check it at high levels, because when we make things louder, they sound better. Not only is the bass increased, but the highs are increased when we raise the level, which gives us a feeling of more depth, more envelopment, and more clarity. So check your mix at both levels. Emotional impact. Music is not just about physics, right? It's about how it makes us feel. Different timbres could evoke different moods. For example, if I played something brash like a snare drum versus like a whistle, these could convey different feelings. We have the stereotypical minor chords being associated with sadness and major chords being associated with happy feelings. The key, however, to eliciting an emotional response is unexpectedness. I actually did a video talking about creating emotional response. You could check that out wherever. Basically, the TLDR is if you want to create an emotional response, you need to have something unexpected, whether melodically or harmonically. In conclusion, understanding this just allows us to be able to understand how we perceive sound in general, which will improve our decisions. We need to make the right decisions in order to mix better. We don't want to just be slamming up knobs and pressing knobs, all right? We want to understand what we're doing. So now that we know how we perceive sound, next we're going to talk about EQ in another video. So thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video talking about EQ. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you around.